That's weird. I thought I read that there was a chapter on will. Maybe there was at the time, but they removed it. .323. Desire. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a little bit shorter. Chapter 17. Desire. Introduction. In Darwin, Mill, James, and Freud, at the modern end of the great tradition, the word desire primarily signifies a cause of animal and human behavior. It is one of the basic terms in psychological analysis, covering that whole range of phenomena, which are also referred to by such terms as wanting, needing, craving, wishing, willing, all of which are discussed in connection with theories of instinct and emotion, libido and love, motivation and purpose. If we turn to traditional beginnings, to the writings of Plato, Aristotle, Galen, and Plotinus, we find that the psychological consideration of desire is part of a much larger context. The ancients are, of course, concerned with the role of desire in causing animal or human behavior, and with the cause of such desire, but they are also interested in cravings, which seem to be present in plants as well as animals. Plato, for example, attributes to plants feelings of pleasure and pain, and the desires which accompany them. The vegetative activities of nutrition, growth, and reproduction seem to spring from basic appetites, or in modern phraseology, biological needs, inherent in all living matter. Because hunger and thirst so readily symbolize the essence of desire, or certainly represent its most general manifestation in living things, the words appetite and desire are frequently used as synonyms in the earlier phase of the tradition, as Hobbes observes when he proposes to use appetite and desire as synonyms. Desire is, quote, the general name, and appetite is, quote, oftentimes restrained to signify the desire for food, namely hunger and thirst. So too, Spinoza says that there is no difference between appetite and desire, yet he adds, unless in this particular, that desire is generally related to men insofar as they are conscious of their appetites, and it may therefore be defined as appetite of which we are conscious. Spinoza here seems to be reflecting the distinction made by earlier writers between natural appetite and conscious desire, which we today would perhaps express in terms of need and wish. The ancient conception of tendencies inherent in all things, inanimate as well as living, which seek a natural fulfillment, broadens the meaning of appetite or desire. When Aristotle says that each thing seeks its own perfection, and that nature does nothing in vain, he is thinking of non-living as well as living bodies. Wherever in the physical world things seem to have a natural tendency to move in a certain direction or to change in a certain way, their appetite, belonging to the very nature of the moving thing, operates as a cause. Adopting this view, Dante declares that neither creator nor creature was ever without love, either natural or of the mind. And in his Convivio, he shows how each thing has its specific love. The love of desire, of the elements in their innate affinity to their proper place. Minerals desire the place where their generation is ordained, with the result that the magnet ever receives power from the direction of its generation. According to this view, it is possible to speak of the natural desire of raindrops to fall, or of smoke to rise. Such a manner of speaking may at first seem metaphorical, an expression of primitive animism and or anthropomorphism, but the ancients, observing different natural tendencies in heavy and light bodies, mean this literally. The sense of such statements is no different from what is meant when it is said that the sunflower, without consciousness, naturally tends to turn toward the sun, or that all men, by nature, desire to know. From its narrowest meaning, with reference to the behavior of animals and men, desire gains a wider connotation when it is conceived as covering the appetites found in living organisms. But in its broadest significance, it refers to the innate tendency inherent in matter itself. As we shall presently see, appetite, desire, or tendency is seated in matter according to the conception of matter, which identifies it with potentiality or potential being. These considerations are more fully treated in the chapters on being, change, and matter, but their significance for the notion of desire can be briefly indicated here. Plotinus suggests the basic insight when he describes matter as in beggardom, striving, as it were, by violence to acquire, and always disappointed. Matter is that in natural things which is the reason for their motion and change. Considering natural change, Aristotle names what he thinks are its three principles. In addition to something divine, good, and desirable, he writes, "We hold that there are two other principles, the one contrary to it, the other such as of its own nature to desire and yearn for it." These are respectively form, privation, and matter. The relation between matter and form is expressed by Aristotle in terms of desire. The form cannot desire itself, he says, for it is not defective, nor can the contrary desire it, for contraries are mutually destructive. The truth is that what desires the form is matter, as the female desires the male. Conceived most generally as natural appetite or tendency, desire becomes a physical or metaphysical term. Natural appetite, says Aquinas, is that inclination which each thing has of its own nature. The significance of desire in this sense extends far beyond psychological phenomena to all things in motion under the impetus or inclination of their own natures, rather than moved violently by forces impressed on them from without. In ancient physics, every natural tendency has an end or fulfillment in which the motion governed by that tendency comes to rest. Eros and telos, desire and end, are complementary concepts, each implying the other as principles of physics, i.e., as factors operating together throughout nature and the order of change. The telos of each thing is the perfection which satisfies the tendency of its nature. The nature does nothing in vain. That nature does nothing in vain means simply that no natural desire, need, or appetite exists without the possibility of fulfillment. Considering the design of the universe and the relation of creatures to God, theologians like Augustine and Aquinas use the concept of desire in both its psychological and its metaphysical sense. Considered metaphysically, desire can be present only in finite beings, for to be finite is to be in want of some perfection. Hence, desire can in no way enter into the immutable, infinite, and perfect being of God. In desire, Aquinas points out a certain imperfection is implied, namely the lack of the good which we have not. Since God is perfect, desire cannot be attributed to him, except metaphorically. Love, however, implies perfection rather than imperfection, since it flows from the act of will to diffuse its own goodness among others. For that reason, although the infinite perfection of God precludes desire, it does not preclude love. The theologian goes beyond the metaphysician or physicist when he carries the analysis of desire to the supernatural plane. As God is the supernatural efficient cause of all created things, so God is also the supernatural final cause, the end or ultimate good, toward which all creatures tend. The metaphysical maxim that each thing seeks its own perfection is then transformed. All things, Aquinas writes, by desiring their own perfection, desire God himself, inasmuch as the perfections of all things are so many similitudes of the divine being. Of those things which desire God, some know him as he is himself, and this is proper to the rational creature. Others know some participation of his goodness. And this belongs also to sensible knowledge. Others have a natural desire without knowledge, as being directed to their ends by a higher intelligence. Period. The existence in the creature of a desire for God raises difficult questions concerning the manner in which this desire is fulfilled. A supernatural end cannot be attained by purely natural means, i.e., without God's help. The vision of God, in which the souls of the blessed come to rest, is, according to the theologian, the ultimate gift of grace. Hence, in man's case, at least, it becomes necessary to ask whether he can have a purely natural desire to see God if the goal of such desire cannot be achieved by purely natural means. The question is not whether men to whom God has revealed the promise of ultimate glory can consciously desire the beatific vision. Clearly that is possible, though to sustain such desire the theological virtue of hope, inseparable from faith and charity, may be required. Rather, the question is whether the beatific vision, which is man's supernatural end, can be the object of natural desire. On this, the theologians appear to be less clearly decided. Aquinas holds that neither man nor any creature can attain final happiness by his natural powers. Yet he also seems to maintain that man has a natural desire for the perfect happiness of eternal life. The object of the will, i.e., of man's appetite, he writes, is the universal good, just as the object of the intellect is the universal truth. Man's natural desire to know the truth, not just some truths, but whole truth, the infinite truth, would seem to require the vision of God for its fulfillment. Aquinas argues similarly from the will's natural desire for the infinite good. Naught can lull man's will, he writes, save the universal good, to be found not in any creature, but in God alone. Some writers find this confirmed in the fact that whatever good a man sets his heart upon, he pursues to infinity. No finite amount of pleasure or power or wealth seems to satisfy him. He always wants more. But there is no end to wanting more of such things. The infinity of such desires must result in frustration. Only God, says the theologian, only an infinite being can satisfy man's infinite craving for all the good there is. Seeing man's restlessness, no matter where he turns to find rest, Augustine declares, "Thou madest us for thyself, and our heart is restless until it repose in thee." Thou madest us for thyself, and our heart is restless until it repose in thee. Pascal reaches the same conclusion when he considers the ennui of men, which results from the desperation of their unending search. Their error, he writes, does not lie in seeking excitement if they seek it only as a diversion. The evil is that they seek it as the possession of the objects of their quest. The evil is that they seek it as if the possession of the objects of their quest would make them really happy. That is the difference, isn't it? It's the belief that it's going to fulfill you. With regard to the frantic pursuit of diversions, he claims that both the censorers and the censored do not understand man's true nature and the misery of man without God. In such restlessness and vain seeking, the theologian sees evidence of man's natural desire to be with God. Admitting the same facts, the skeptics interpret the infinity of man's desire as a craving to be God. If this is not every man's desire, it is certainly Satan's in Paradise Lost. Skeptic or believer, every man understands the question which Goethe and Dante, among the great poets, make their central theme. At what moment, amid man's striving and restlessness, will the soul gladly cry, "Ah, linger on, thou art so fair"? Confident that there can be no such moment, Faust makes that the basis of his wager with Mephistopheles. The two poets appear to give opposite answers to the question. Faust finds Circe in an earthly vision of progressive endeavor. Heavenly rest comes to the soul of Dante at the very moment it relinquishes its quest, winning peace through surrender. Interesting. That seems more likely to me. Once you're truly happy with what you have, that's when you win. In the broadest or theological sense of the word, God alone does not desire. In the narrowest or psychological sense, only animals and men do. The contrast of meanings is useful. Natural appetite or tendency throws light on the nature of conscious desire. In order to determine the nature and seat of desire, Socrates in the Philebus considers such things as hunger, thirst, and the like as in the class of desires. He points out that when we say a man thirsts, we mean to say that he is empty. It is not drink he desires, but replenishment by drink, which is a change of state. The insight Socrates generalizes by saying that he who is empty desires the opposite of what he experiences, for he is empty and desires to be full. In the Symposium, using the words love and desire as if they were interchangeable, Socrates declares that he who desires something is in wanting of something, and love is of something which a man wants and has not. In the psychological sphere, desire and love are often identified at least verbally. the one word is frequently substituted for the other. Here, the fact already noted that God loves but does not desire suggests the root of the distinction between desire and love. Desire always involves some lack or privation to be remedied by a change, whereas love, certainly requited love, requited, implies the kind of satisfaction which abhors change. Love and desire are, of course, frequently mixed, but this does not affect their essential difference as tendencies. They are as different as giving and getting. Love aims at the well-being of the beloved, while desire seeks to enjoy a pleasure or possess a good. Not all writers, however, contrast the generosity of love with the acquisitiveness of desire. Locke, for example, finds self-interest and self-seeking in both. The meaning of love, he observes, is known to anyone who reflects, quote, upon the thought he has of the delight which any present or absent thing is apt to produce in him. For when a man declares in autumn, when he is eating them, or in spring, when there are none, that he loves grapes, it is no more but that the taste of grapes delights him. The meaning of desire is, in Locke's opinion, closely related. It consists in, quote, the uneasiness a man finds in himself upon the absence of anything whose present enjoyment carries the idea of delight with it. We desire, in short, the things we love, but do not possess. The distinction between love and desire, the question whether they are distinct in animals as well as in men, and their relation to one another when they are distinct, are matters more fully discussed in the chapter on love. It is enough to observe here that when writers use the two words interchangeably, they use both words to signify wanting and seeking. In the case of animals and men, the thing wanted is an object of conscious desire only if it is something known. In addition to being known as an object of science is known, it must also be deemed good or pleasant. In other words, worth having. For Locke, desire, as we have seen, is no more than an uneasiness of the mind for want of some absent good, which is measured in terms of pleasure and pain. What has an aptness to produce pleasure in us is that we call good, and what is apt to produce pain in us we call evil. That which we consciously desire, that which we judge to be desirable, would thus be something we regard as good for us, while the bad or evil would be that which we seek to avoid as somehow injurious rather than beneficial to us. There is no question that desire and aversion are psychologically connected with estimations of good and evil, or pleasure and pain. This is the case no matter how we answer the moralist's question. Do we desire something because it is good, or do we call it good simply because we desire it? The ethical significance of the question and of the opposite answers to it is discussed in the chapter on good and evil. The metaphysical conception of natural desire provides terms for the psychological analysis of conscious desire and its object. Viewed as belonging to the very nature of a thing, appetite, according to Aristotle, consists in the tendency toward, quote, something we do not have and which we need. Both factors are essential, the privation and the capacity as potentiality for having what is lacked. Privation in the strict sense is always correlative to potentiality. Potentiality. To potentiality. The writers who use these terms would not speak of the sunflower being deprived of wisdom, even as they would not call a stone blind. Blindness is the deprivation of sight in things which have by nature the capacity to see. So when it is said that man by nature desires to know, or that certain animals, instinctively gregarious, naturally tend to associate with one another in herds or societies, the potentiality of knowledge or social life is indicated. And precisely because of these potentialities, ignorance and solitariness are considered privations. We observe here two different conditions of appetite or desire, as the opposite of privation is possession, or of lacking, having. So the opposite states of appetite are the drive toward the unpossessed and satisfaction in possession. We do not strive for that which we have unless it be to retain our possession of it against loss, and we do not feel satisfied until we get that which we have been seeking. If a man, being strong, desired to be strong, says Socrates in the Symposium, or being swift, desired to be swift, or being healthy, desired to be healthy, he might be thought to desire something which he already has, or is. This would be a misconception which we must avoid to anyone who says, I desire to have simply what I have. Socrates thinks he should reply, you, my friend, having wealth and health and strength, want to have the continuance of them. When you say, I desire that which I have and nothing else, is not your meaning that you want to have in the future what you now have? This is equivalent to saying that a man desires something which is for him non-existent and which he has not got, from which Socrates draws the conclusion that everyone desires that which he has not already, which is future and not present, and of which he is in want. The objective of desire, natural or conscious, thus seems to be an altered condition in the desirer, the result of union with the object desired. Man's natural desire to know impels him to learn. Every act of learning which satisfies this natural desire consists in a changed condition of his mind, a change which both Plato and Aristotle describe as a motion from ignorance to knowledge. When we consciously desire food, it is not the edible thing as such we seek, but rather the eating of it. Only the eating of it will quiet our desire. With that change in our condition we call nourishment. That the edible thing is only incidentally the object of our desire may be seen in the fact that no way in which we can possess food other than eating it satisfies hunger. The distinction between natural and conscious desire is complicated by other closely related distinctions which psychologists have made. Freud, for example, distinguishes between conscious and unconscious desire. Darwin separates instinctive from learned desires, and James observes how a conscious desire may become habitual and operate almost automatically without our awareness of either its object or its action. Part of the complication is verbal and can be removed by referring to natural desires as non-conscious rather than unconscious. The word conscious literally means with knowledge. Creatures which lack the faculty of knowing cannot desire consciously. It does not follow, however, that sentient or conscious beings cannot have natural appetites. Man's natural desire to know is a case in point. That natural human tendency is not excluded by the fact that many men also consciously seek knowledge. Knowing what knowledge is and considering it something worth having. The instinctive desires of animals are not generally thought to operate apart from the perception of the object toward which the animal is emotionally impelled. The instinctive desire works consciously, both on the side of perception and on the side of the emotionally felt impulse. If because it is innate, rather than learned or acquired through experience, we call the instinctive desire natural. It is well to remember that we are not here using the word to signify lack of consciousness, yet both instinctive and acquired desires may operate unconsciously. What Freud means by a repressed desire illustrates this point. The repressed desire, whether instinctual in origin or the result of some acquired fixation of the libido on object or ego, would be a conscious tendency if it were not repressed. Freud compares the process of repression to the efforts of a man to get from one room to another past the guard of a doorkeeper. The excitations in the unconscious, to begin with, remain unconscious when they have pressed forward to the threshold and been turned back by the doorkeeper. They are incapable of becoming conscious. We call them then repressed. Being repressed, when applied to any single impulse, means being unable to pass out of the unconscious system because of the doorkeeper's refusal of admittance into the pre-conscious. The repressed desire is made to operate unconsciously by being repressed, which does not prevent it from influencing our conduct of thought, but only from intruding its driving force and its goal upon our attention. In contrast, the desire which works habitually, and therefore to some extent unconsciously, is not repressed, but merely one which no longer demands our full attention. The appetitive or driving aspect of emotions is indicated by William James in his analysis of instinctive behavior. The functioning of an instinct may be viewed, according to James, as a train of psychological events of general reflex type, called forth by determinate sensory stimuli in contact with the animal's body, or at a distance in his environment, arousing emotional excitements which go with them. The emotional part of the instinctive behavior is at once an impulse to perform certain acts and the feeling which accompanies the acts performed. The sheep instinctively recognize the wolf as dangerous, fears and flees. It runs away because it is afraid, and feels fear in the act of flight. When in his theory of the emotions, James goes so far as to say that the feeling of fear results from running away, he does not mean to deny that the emotion of fear involves the impulse to flee. In its aspect as impulse, or tendency to act an emotion is a desire consciously aroused by sense perceptions and accompanied by conscious feelings. This conception of emotion has been variously expressed in the tradition of the great books. Aquinas, for example, calls all the emotions or passions movements of the sensitive appetite. But he also uses the words desire and aversion along with love and hate, anger and fear, to name specific emotions. Hobbes recognizes the appetitive tendency, which is common to all the emotions, which he finds at their root what he calls endeavor, those small beginnings of motion within the body of man, before they appear in walking, speaking, striking, and other visible actions. This endeavor, he goes on to say, when it is toward something which causes it, is called appetite or desire. Spinoza makes the same point in somewhat different terms. Desire, he writes, is the essence itself, or nature of a person, insofar as this nature is conceived from its given constitution as determined towards any action. As his nature is constituted in this or that way, so must his desire vary, and the nature of one desire differ from another, just as the effects from which each desire arises differ. There are as many kinds of desire, therefore, as there are kinds of joy, sorrow, love, etc., and in consequence, as there are kinds of objects by which we are affected. Those psychologists who find in man two distinct faculties of knowledge, the senses and the reason or intellect, also find in him two distinct faculties of appetite or desire. The distinction is perhaps most sharply made by Aristotle and Aquinas, who claim that there must be one appetite tending towards the universal good, which belongs to reason, and another with a tendency towards the particular good, which appetite belongs to sense. The traditional name of the intellectual appetite, or the faculty of rational desire, is will. In Spinoza's vocabulary, the effort of desire, when it is related to the mind alone, is called will, but when it is related at the same time both to the mind and the body, it is called appetite. Psychologists who attribute these diverse modes of desire, as they attribute sensation and thought, to a single faculty called mind or understanding, nevertheless deal with the whole range of appetitive phenomena, including both the animal passions and the acts of will. James, for example, treats the instinctive acts associated with the emotions as automatic and reflexive movements and separates them from voluntary movements, which, being desired and intended beforehand, are done with full prevision of what they are to be. In so doing, he draws a line between emotional impulses and acts of will, even though he does not distinguish two appetitive faculties. With or without the distinction in faculties, almost all observers of human experience and conduct seem to agree upon a distinction in types of conscious desire, at least insofar as they recognize the ever-present conflict between the passions and the will. These matters are more fully considered in the chapters on emotion and will. The role of desire in human life, especially emotional desire, is so intimately connected with problems of good and evil, virtue, duty, and happiness that, until quite recently, the subject was discussed mainly in books on ethics, politics, or rhetoric, rather than psychology. Even Freud, who tries to separate psychological description and explanation from moral principles or conclusions, cannot avoid treating the effects of morality upon the dynamics of desire and the life of the passions. Many of the fundamental terms of psychoanalysis conflict: repression, rationalization, sublimation, to name only some, carry the connotation of moral issues, even though they imply a purely psychological resolution of them. Contrary to a popular misconception, Freud expressly declares that it is out of the question that part of the analytic treatment should consist of advice to live freely. The conflict between libidinal desires and sexual repression, he explains, is not resolved by helping one side to win a victory over the other. Although Freud thinks that what the world calls its code of morals demands more sacrifices than it is worth, he also declares that we must beware of overestimating the importance of abstinence in affecting neurosis. What Freud calls emotional infantilism resembles to some degree what a moralist like Aristotle calls self-indulgence or incontinence. To give vent to all the promptings of desire without regard to the demands of society or reality is to revert to infancy, a state characterized, according to Freud, by the irreconcilability of its wishes with reality. Because children, quote, live at the beck and call of appetite, and it is in them that the desire for what is pleasant is strongest. Aristotle thinks it fitting that we should speak of self-indulgence when it occurs in an adult as a childish fault. Aristotle and Freud seem to be looking at the same facts of human nature and seeing them in the same light. What Freud describes as the conflict between the pleasure principle and the reality principle, Aristotle, and with him Spinoza, treats as a conflict between the passions and the reason, and Kant conceives in terms of the opposition between desire and duty. What Freud says of the reality principle, that it, quote, demands and enforces the postponement of satisfaction, the renunciation of manifold possibilities, and the temporary endurance of pain, parallels traditional statements concerning the role of reason or of duty in the moral life. Where the moralists speak of the necessity for regulating or moderating emotional desires, Freud refers to the need of domesticating them, as one would train a beast to serve the ends of human life. Moralists regulating or moderating emotional desires, the need of domesticating them as one would train a beast. The implication in Aristotle and Spinoza, as well as in Freud, does not seem to be that man's animal appetites are in themselves bad, but that, if they are undisciplined or uncontrolled, they cause disorder in the individual life and in society. Some moralists, however, take an opposite view. For them, desire is intrinsically evil, a factor of discontent and fraught with pain. While what we crave is wanting, Lucretius writes, it seems to transcend all the rest. Then, when it has been gotten, we crave something else. Yet, as often as a man gains something new, he discovers afresh that he is not better off. Either our desires are unsatisfied, and then we suffer the agony of frustration, or they are satisfied, and so are we desperate with ennui. Hence, freedom from all desires, not just their moderation, seems to be recommended for peace of mind. As centuries later, Schopenhauer recommended the negation of the will to live in order to avoid frustration or boredom. Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, and later Kant, similarly urge us not to yield to the persuasions of the body, and never to be overpowered either by the motion of the senses or of the appetites. But whereas the Stoics would restrain desire because it is animal, and in order to avoid pain, Kant argues that the renunciation of desire should be undertaken, not merely in accordance with duty, but from duty, which must be the true end of all moral cultivation. The opposition between these two views of desire in the moral life represents one of the major issues in ethical theory, further discussed in the chapters on duty and virtue. The doctrine of natural appetite is crucially relevant to the issue. If the naturalist in ethics is right, he is so by virtue of the truth that by virtue of the truth that natural tendencies are everywhere the measure of good and evil. If, however, there is no truth in the doctrine of natural desire, then the impulses which spring from man's animal passions can claim no authority in the court of reason. I think I calculated if I keep doing one idea a day, finish sometime in March. Cross it off the list. Seems like a long time. Maybe I need to up my regiment. And maybe I need a better stream setup than this. It'd be nice if there was also, if I had a legit desk to sit at with the book I was reading on a table. Multiple space for multiple books. And then you could have like a top-down view. Could still include the green screen somehow, perhaps. And the bookshelves. Multiple camera angles. One of the book on the table, one of me reading. Just get crazy with it. Get real intellectual with it. Big oak desk, candles, little statues and artifacts, paintings, whole aesthetic. Because I'd like to purchase a book set called Gateway to the Great Books of the Western World, which is a lot of material. That would be like a full-time thing, studying that. Which it can't really ever be a full-time thing, I don't think. But it'd be a greater degree of part-time. I'm excited about those books because I never knew they existed until recently. After I got refunded for the actual book set I tried to purchase of the great books, because I was a little greedy. I spend like $75 on eBay. See if it's still there. My eBay watch list. Show me my watch list. Uh-oh, is it gone? Did someone buy it? Oh no. Wait a minute. So Someone must have bought it. That should send me an email if that happens. I'd be pissed at myself if I missed out on those. It was like a really good condition. Was this it? I thought I put it on my watch list. I don't think those are it. Yeah, that's not it. Oh, no, there they are. Fuck. Ended. It says ended. This item's out of stock. It's sold. Damn it! God damn it. Yeah, well. I will never find. I will probably never find a set as good quality as that one again. In as good a quality. Jared, you fool. Look how good it was. It's like new, but it's from like 1952. Oh well. I guess it doesn't really matter how good a quality it is, as long as it's readable. Yes, it matters. It matters very little compared to what you're supposedly gaining from it. Alright.